On an overcast winter morning, Charles Vigliotti, chief executive of American Organic Energy, drove me to his 62-acre lot in rural Yaffan, New York, 60 miles east of Manhattan, to show me his vision of the future of alternative energy. He snaked his company Jeep around tall piles of wood chips, sandy loam and dead leaves. Then, with a sudden turn, we shot up the side of a 30-foot bluff of soil. At the top, we gazed down upon those many piles and breathed in the mildly sulfurous exhalations of a nearby dump. Vigliotti radiated enthusiasm. Within the next several months, he expected to break ground, right there, he said, thrusting his index finger toward a 2-acre clearing, on a massive $50 million anaerobic digester, a high-tech plant that would transform into clean energy, a rich reserve that until recently has gone largely untapped. Food waste. This resource, Vigliotti knew, had a lot going for it. Like oil and coal, kitchen scraps can be converted into energy. But unlike oil and coal, which are expensive to dig out of the ground, food waste is something that cities will actually pay someone to haul away. Many innovative municipalities, in an effort to keep organic material out of dumps, where it generates methane, a greenhouse gas, already separate food from garbage, and send it to old-fashioned compost facilities. There, workers pile the waste in linear heaps called windrows, mix it with leaves and grass clippings, and let oxygen-dependent microbes transform the gunk into lovely dark fertilizer. But the more material you compost, the more space, and gas-guzzling bulldozers and windrow turners, you need to process it. It can get a little smelly, too, which is yet another reason New York City, which generates about 1 million tons of organic waste a year, will probably never host giant compost farms. But anaerobic digestion, in which food is broken down by microbes inside tall, airtight silos, has a real shot at scaling near densely populated areas. The footprint of such plants is relatively small, and their odors are mechanically contained, if they are operated properly. Digesters do cost more to build and run than compost sites, but they more than make up for that by generating two separate revenue streams: fertilizer and biogas, which is chemically similar to natural gas and can be burnt to make heat and electricity. To hear Vigliotti explain it, the supply of feedstock for his anaerobic digester was unending, a veritable geyser of potential profit flowing from every part of the food chain, orphan produce from wholesale markets, the crusty remains of all-you-can-eat buffets, fryer oil, kitchen grease, and glutty residential plate scrappings. All of this was simply waiting to be tapped by someone with the chutzpah and the capital to convert it into a product, renewable energy, for which there is unending demand. Vigliotti's only real cost, not inconsiderable, was refining. And lawyers. We face a staggering level of regulatory approval, he told me. In the crunchy granola world of urban compost, populated by outdoorsy types in Carhartts and work boots, Vigliotti stands out. He wears designer suits and a pinky ring, slicks back his hair a la LBJ, and commutes from his Oyster Bay home in a silver Porsche Panamera. The nephew of Vincent Vigliotti, an established Bronx trash carter, Charles spent the 1970s hanging off the back of a commercial garbage truck working the streets of Jackson Heights, Queens. My uncle's carting business and my carting business were completely separate, Vigliotti told me, twice, the first time we met. Later, I understood why. His uncle pleaded guilty in 1997 to charges of attempted racketeering, which stemmed from his participation in a mafia-dominated cartel. Over the years, Vigliotti, who was 63, gradually evolved from a hauler of waste to a producer of fine fertilizers. And so he was well positioned when New York City contracted last year with 6 companies to transform the food waste it currently collects from the curbsides of almost 1 million residents. 4 of those companies will send their scraps to traditional compost facilities. A 5th will truck its share to the Newtown Creek wastewater treatment plant, operated by the New York City Department of Environmental Protection in North Brooklyn. There, chopped-up food will be stirred into giant tanks that already digest sewage anaerobically, using microbes. The resulting biogas will be captured and used to power turbines on site or to heat nearby homes. Vigliotti's contract, the second largest, allows him to annually shunt more than 23,000 tons of city food waste into his soon-to-be-built Yafan plant, where it will mingle with 155,000 tons of scraps from 2 counties outside the city. When it is up and running, American Organic Energy will have the largest anaerobic digester east of the Mississippi. "I'd like to say I had a vision of environmental responsibility," Vigliotti told me, with a wink, about the origins of his new endeavor. "But I saw food composting as a business opportunity." Throughout the modern era of waste collection, New Yorkers, like other Americans, have been asked to pull all kinds of things from their kitchen trash cans for a supposedly higher purpose than burial at the dump. First it was paper, metal and plastic, then electronic goods and, in some places, textiles. Now we increasingly separate food waste. Sometimes we know where these recyclables will eventually alight. Junk mail may be converted to printer paper, for example, but mostly we remain in the dark. There has always been an aura of mystery to these flows, in part because markets for recyclables continually change. For those who voluntarily set out food scraps for municipal collection, true believers, that is, the process provokes yet another layer of uncertainty. We assume our dregs are headed for a giant compost pile somewhere, but what happens to it next? For a brief time, I could provide answers to such questions. As my own compost baron, I sorted and tipped my grapefruit rinds and eggshells into a front yard composting bin. The resulting fertilizer fed my building's crabapple tree. But when I ran out of leaves to mix into the scraps, my compost grew extremely smelly. Odors, flies and quality control can bedevil even the most experienced food waste recyclers, but I didn't give up. Instead, a few years ago, I upgraded from a solo operation to something just a little bigger, joining the 200,000 other New Yorkers who weekly march their organics to one of 74 drop-off sites, at farmers markets, subway stations, libraries, around New York City, collectively diverting 2.3 million pounds of food waste from the dump each year. Lugging scraps to my farmer's market was enormously satisfying. I liked returning my potato peels to the woman who grew my potatoes. I knew she'd make good use of them. The act also felt more immediately important than many other things I did to lessen my planetary impact, like driving less and line drying more. When the Department of Sanitation's curbside organics collection program expanded to my Brooklyn neighborhood in 2015, I was grateful, but also a little wary. Placing my scraps on the curb in a securely latched, hard-sided bin was certainly convenient, but my compost cycle was starting to spiral, from small batch to medium to, well, I wasn't sure what. I had no idea where this centralized system deposited my scraps, or how, or if, they were transformed into something of value. By 2018, the Department of Sanitation hopes to extend its curbside program, the largest residential food waste collection scheme in the country, citywide. But quantity doesn't always equal quality, and already there is evidence that an industrial future may not match the integrity of the artisanal present. Longer supply chains mean burning more fuel to transport this resource, and recipients of scraps have little control over what New Yorkers throw into their bins. Because local composters, at urban farms, educate their suppliers, they don't need to remove plastic bags, twist ties and other detritus from their feedstock. But the anonymity of industrial-scale operations means that such contaminants can easily slide through. When New York's curbside program began several years ago, trucks trundled city scraps down the New Jersey Turnpike to the Peninsula Compost Company, a large facility in Wilmington, Delaware. But after Waste Management, the nation's largest solid waste handler, bought a controlling interest in the plant 6 years ago, its compost quality declined, it contained too many shards of glass and pieces of plastic, and neighbors began to complain that the yard smelled like the bottom of a garbage pail. Environmental regulators forced Peninsula to shut down in 2014. Since then, the city has been carting food waste to several local transfer stations, one of which I visited in Jamaica, Queens. Inside a dreary industrial shed at a private company called Regal Recycling, a team of workers in rubber boots and face masks comb through a 10-foot-tall pile of organic waste collected from various schools. Using long-handled hose and their gloved fingers, the men painstakingly extracted plastic baggies, milk boxes, Capri Sun pouches, sporks and balls of aluminum foil. As the volume of curbside organics climbs, Regal and other city transfer stations will install mechanical pre-processing equipment. Michael Reilly's Regal's vice president, told me the city paid him about $80 a ton to receive this material, and then he paid truckers to transport the waste upstate and the permitted composter $35 per ton to receive it. Sometimes the load was clean, sometimes not. Reilly pivoted away from the school waste and gestured toward the 20-foot mound shoved against the opposite wall. Collected from 2 fruit wholesalers, the pile was almost 100% mangoes and avocados, with very little extraneous material. And it smelled great. I was starting to understand that compost, like oil, has different grades. Pure commercial streams like this one were akin to West Texas light crude, clean and easy to process. School and residential streams were like tar sands, dirty and expensive to upgrade. Reilly's decontaminated table scraps eventually made their way to McEnroe Organic Farm, which stretches over 1,100 acres of rolling pasture land and cultivated fields in the mid-Hudson Valley. There I watched as front-end loaders mixed the food with locally sourced wood shavings and straw. The woody materials provided more carbon to complement the food's nitrogen and bulk up the compost. Thoroughly mingled, the compost was then laid in rows and covered by a fleece blanket to cook. Heat killed any pathogens and weed seeds. Twice a week for a month, workers removed the blankets and spider a mechanical windrow turner over the top, fluffing and mixing. After resting for several more months, the compost is fed into a screening machine. About 60% of McEnroe's 28,000 tons of finished material nourishes the farm, which raises organic vegetables, grains and pastured meat. The rest, selling for up to $100 a cubic yard, helps balance its books. The nation's industrialized compost operations bring in roughly $3 billion annually. American farmers bought $21.2 billion of conventional fertilizers in 2016. I like being part of the smaller economy, though. McEnroe's adorable Angus calves and grain-filled silos made it easy to imagine that my waste was circling virtuously, even as I blocked out the miserable labors of the transfer station downstate. The system worked, I like to think. Compost could scale up, food could return to being food. Then I got on the phone with Will Brinton, who runs the Woods and Laboratories in Mount Vernon, me, and has spent his entire career studying the science of rot. Several years ago, Brinton began comparing the costs and benefits of composting food with those of anaerobically digesting it. He assumed that composting would come out on top. But, Brinton said, I was horrified to see, at the end of the study, that we were investing more carbon in making compost than the compost returned to the earth. All those energy-sucking bulldozers and trucks and augers and screeners were taking their toll. Biogas created by anaerobically digesting corn cobs and orange peels, in contrast, was carbon neutral. That's because the plant generates its own energy, and burning the fuel doesn't release new carbon into the atmosphere, as burning oil or coal does. It merely recycles the carbon already inside those scraps. Take the calculations a step further. By subtracting the methane that would have been generated by putting this food waste in landfills, and biofuel could be considered carbon negative. In recognition of these facts, the Environmental Protection Agency now lists anaerobic digestion as preferable to composting when it comes to surplus food. Of course, feeding surpluses to people, followed by animals, is even better. Even the U.S. Composting Council, a trade group, acknowledges anaerobic digestion's beneficial role in producing energy. At first, I didn't know what to make of Charles Vigliotti. You seldom hear the words wealthy and composter strung together. But as he explained his roundabout path to the energy sector, I began to sense Vigliotti's commitment to solving some serious environmental problems, even as he lined his silky pockets. After city landfills began closing in the 1980s, Vigliotti found he was spending too much money directing waste out of state. He began to move away from the trash business and in 1991 established with his brother Arnold a compost company in Westbury, New York, that transforms Himalayas of landscape debris, grass clippings, leaves, wood chips, into millions of bags of lawn and garden products. Business was good, but Vigliotti remained restless. In 1999, he opened a compost site in Yafang, where in 2008 he began dabbling in food waste, mixing scraps from a Whole Foods market and a small batch 1-ton manufacturer into his formula for potting soils. At this point, Vigliotti wasn't thinking of food waste as a renewable energy source or a way to reduce the city's far-flung garbage footprint or greenhouse gas emissions. It was simply a way to take in more volume and thus make more money. Vigliotti initially composted his food scraps using a basic windrow technology similar to McEnroe's. That was fine for bakery waste and those 1-tons. But when he began accepting meat, fish, oils and road-killed deer, he ran into trouble. The site now produced eye-watering odors and attracted blankets of gulls. After a multi-year battle with angry locals, who supported organics recycling in theory but had little patience for its stinky reality, Vigliotti and other stakeholders devised the remedy. Instead of composting food in windrows, he would digest it in tanks. But in order to justify the expense of building those tanks, Vigliotti would need to attract more food scraps. And if those came from households in addition to commercial establishments, he would need a lot of fancy equipment to screen out the sort of contaminants that bedeviled Greeley's laborers in Queens and Waste Management's workers at Peninsula in Delaware. And so the project grew. Today, American Organic Energy is supported by $45 million in borrowed capital, plus grants from the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, $1.35 million, and Empire State Development, $400,000. Gazing down from that high bluff of soil in Yafang, Vigliotti laid out the mechanics of his new anaerobic operation. The trucks are going to pull into a 2-acre building and dump their load into a 10-foot deep pit, he explained. Air pressure inside would be lower than outside, so no odors would escape. Next, expensive German machinery would crush the cans and bottles that would inevitably rot in with the food, metals would be extracted and packages shredded, and with the addition of water, random plastic would flow to the top of the tanks while glass and grit settled to the bottom. We know we're gonna get loads from supermarkets with unopened tuna cans and expired bacon packages, Vigliotti said, while residential food is going to be in a plastic bag with a soup can of broken glass in it. That's the way Americans throw out their garbage. Vigliotti wasn't bothered. We are not changing human nature but building our plan to suit it, he said. His philosophy was diametrically opposed to that of community composters, who insist that participants honor and defend the integrity of their organics, down to the removal of tiny stickers from lemons and limes. And for the most part, they do. But it was clear to me now that these artisanal operations, even if they do expand to schools, parks and other city-owned spaces with support from local government, will never be able to handle the borough's tsunami of residential food waste. Nor do they particularly want to. Once isolated, Vigliotti's organic material will move into 6 3-story tanks, where it will stew for 20 days, producing enough biogas to generate nearly 50 million kilowatt-hours of electricity a year. 20% of the output will feed the plant's electrical demand. PSE&G, a local electrical utility, will be able to buy the rest, unless American Organic Energy compresses its biogas to run trucks. Vigliotti won't reveal his per-ton processing costs or his expected revenue, but he noted that selling the gas alone will bring in 7 figures, even with the commodities priced near a 10-year low because of the fracking boom. But gas isn't the only thing that American Organic Energy plans to sell. When the microbes are done feasting, Vigliotti continued, they'll leave behind a watery digestate that machines will squeeze and separate into solids and liquids. Vigliotti will blend the solids with woody material, the stuff arrayed at our feet, of which he had an endless supply, and aerobically compost the mixture in windrows, then sell the resulting 40,000 tons per year of potting soil to regional garden centers through a deal with Scott's Miracle-Gro. Partnering with GE Water and Process Technologies, he will put the leftover liquids through a multi-stage filtering process, after which American Organic Energy will reuse the clean portion on site and sell the fraction that's high in ammonium sulfate, a projected 912,500 gallons a year, as plant food, around $20 for 2.5 gallons, retail. We'll be targeting the affluent urban market with that, Vigliotti said. Earlier this year, Vigliotti received the last of his state permits, and he was hoping to break ground on his plant this spring. But he continued to talk up American Organic Energy to any civic group that would have him. I caught one of these presentations the previous year at a meeting of the Brooklyn Solid Waste Advisory Board, which convened at Brooklyn Borough Hall. After walking the audience of laypeople and waste experts through his blueprints, he explained that digestion beats composting because it generates energy, and that digesting his way trumped digesting inside a wastewater treatment plant because that plant's back-end digestate contains sewage, plus traces of many other materials, including industrial waste and heavy metals, that go down city pipes. You can't market the end product. He barked. Nothing, it seemed, could stand in Vigliotti's way. He was nearly levitating from his Italian loafers when he wrapped up his presentation with the sweeping offer. If the city gives us a site in the boroughs, he said, we will build and operate a plant that handles 1,000 tons of food waste per day, and we will process it at rates lower than what anyone else is offering. The room grew quiet. 1,000 tons is the amount generated daily by all of the city's institutional and commercial food establishments combined. Was Vigliotti serious? Absolutely, he said. With his network of corporate partners, he dreamed of building beautifully managed, energy-producing digesters on smallish city plots across the nation. Here in New York, he added, his words tumbling ahead of his thoughts, we could put together a proposal that would make everyone's eyeballs and bells ring, and a bunch of carbon footprint stuff, compressed natural gas trucks. The crowd nodded, caught up in his enthusiasm for a food waste-fueled clean energy future. Everyone here knows there is more material in this city than 10 facilities like ours could handle, Vigliotti said, rather sternly. Then he packed up his schematic diagrams and headed for his Porsche.